Hey everyone, Francis here from What a Hell of a Way to Die. If you've been wondering how you can support myself and Nate here on the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/hellofaWayToDie. Joining the Patreon at any level gets you access to our Discord server, one bonus episode a month, and early access to interviews. At the $5 level, you'll get more bonus content and an opportunity to vote on monthly Zoo Crew episodes. And at the $10 and up level, you'll get exclusive stickers, patches, and pins sent out to you every quarter. Your support means that we can keep our regular episodes free and make sure we don't have to rely on advertisers. If you can, please consider joining and supporting your two favorite veteran dads.
Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis, and with me today I have Lilith, who posted in our Discord, and then I reached out because Lilith has some really cool, a really cool job that I've always wanted to talk to people about. She's a collections manager for a museum. So, Lilith, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on, Francis. I really appreciate being on. And I'm always happy to kind of educate people about museums and how they work behind the scenes because they're like this unspoken like part of our society that we kind of like give a lot of power to and then don't think about how the sausage is made.
Right. It's just, my museum here, the art museum, is where they keep all the art, and I go and I look at it, twice a year, and then I go home and don't think about it again. But that's not really how museums work. So I wanted to get into a little, you offered me a little bit more of the nitty gritty of museums as well. So we'll do that too. But go ahead and tell us which museum that do you work for, and whatever disclaimers you need to put out into the show as well.
So I work for the National Japanese American Historical Society. It's a 501c3 based out of San Francisco, California, and we operate two galleries. The first one is at Post Street. It's the Peace Gallery next to Peace Plaza in Japantown in San Francisco, which we use as like a community space. We try to host community-oriented exhibits there, everything from LGBTQ Nikkei, which is the Japanese American diaspora, artists during Pride Month, to the San Francisco Nisei Fishing Club for their 104th anniversary did an exhibit. And we also hold the lease on and we interpret Building 640 on the Presidio of San Francisco, which was the Military Intelligence Service Language School, or the Fourth Army Language School, where majority Japanese American students learned Japanese in preparation for the Second World War and during the Second World War to serve as military intelligence translators and linguists for the United States Army.
Yeah, they moved that down to Monterey. It's a much nicer place to go to language school, I think.
The Building 640 originally was a hangar for biplanes back when the U.S. Army Signal Corps was the precursor to the U.S. Army Air Force. So, at that time it was an over 20-year-old hangar that had been, built, and they kind of just shoved them in there. But a little disclaimer up top: the National Japanese American Historical Society is a 501c3, which means that it is officially nonpartisan. We don't lobby. We don't take political stances because we are a registered nonprofit. That's not the role of nonprofits in American society. At least it shouldn't be. So everything I say is coming from me and not the Historical Society. None of this is like reflective of the official opinion of the society, its board, its executive director, its membership. It's all just me.
Well, and that's fine. That's what we want here. So the collection that you were working on, specifically Japanese American military history, incarceration, resistance, and things like that. What are the what are the collections that you have that are in relation to these things?
So the Historical Society holds a collection of about 10,000 museum objects and 30,000 archival records, and we hold everything from the regimental diaries, copies of the regimental diaries of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and 100th Infantry Battalion, two of the segregated Japanese American units that fought during the Second World War, to research papers related to the military intelligence service, the collection of research that was done, creating the two scholarly books that are kind of like the historical record of the military intelligence service, David Swift's First Class and James McNaughton's Nisei Linguists. We hold all their original, well, at least we hold the entire Smith collection. We hold much of the McNaughton stuff as well. McNaughton worked with our collection as well to develop his book. So we hold that sort of material. We also hold, things like correspondence that happened in the camps. We have V-mail that went between soldiers and their families during the Second World War. And our museum collection includes everything from uniforms and a katana given to one of the Nisei linguists by one of the first generals in the post-war Japanese ground self-defense forces as a thank you for being his cultural attache to the Allied occupation force, to furniture that was handmade in camp, religious objects, things that were buried in people's backyards when the war started because they didn't want to have things that were associated with Japanese identity, and so they had buried them for fear of these cultural objects like making people think that they weren't American.
Sure. And for good reason. We saw what we did to the Japanese Americans during World War II. It was not kind. Not a great thing we were doing.
Yeah, and we have a decent amount of collections related to that. We also work a lot with survivors of that, both veterans, though there are not many of those left, but also people who lived in the camps, were born in the camps, to collect their oral history. So we have significant, oral history and transcript records of people, from guys who went off and volunteered to join the U.S. military, and were initially refused and just kept going back to the recruiting station until they finally sort of busted the door down, and eventually the government was forced to start allowing Japanese Americans to serve, to people who refused to serve until the United States would, let their families out of camp, to, Quakers who were happened to also be Japanese, who were pacifists, who were civil libertarians and uh, attempted to civilly resist the incarceration process.
Right. And I believe like one of the Japanese units was one of the most decorated World War II units like in history. Like there was a, of course, racism, big part of any military operation, really kind of baked into how, it's easy to kill somebody when you don't think of them as a person, as it turns out. So like the racism is really big part of it. And it's always been surprising to me to hear that Japanese people who have their families incarcerated by the American government, it's like, no, I still want to go kill Nazis. That is very heartening to me, and really for me kind of shows like a little bit of resiliency that other people have to be like, no, America is worth this. I don't know if that's true. Coming, later on. I'm just a white guy in 2024. I don't know how people were thinking about it back in 1941, but it has always been very surprising to me. So what are you've mentioned some of the things that you guys have in there. What are some of the other, like, I know that you mentioned to me that you have to deal with making sure that that the integrity of the artifacts remains, like make sure that it's not getting too humid, it's not getting bleached out by light, things like that. So what, when you're curating this collection, kind of take me through a day. Like you walk in, is there just here's the big museum drawers and you pull things out? Like, how does this work?
Most days I'm very lucky. San Francisco's a bike-friendly city, so I get to bike to work, which is one of the coolest things you can possibly do, in my humble opinion. But most days I get into work, and my job is really archival more than museum, which is weird. I am not necessarily a trained archivist. There are people who have masters of library and information sciences, MLISs, who specialize in archives. I cross-trained in archives when I was doing my master's of museum studies, so I'm obviously not an amateur, but it's not my primary discipline. But most days I go in and I do a lot of spreadsheets to keep track of where everything is and where it's going and where it's supposed to be. And then I attempt to do my best to resist entropy. So the basic job of a collections manager is I am not a curator. I don't design the exhibits. I am not a conservator. I don't go in and do preventive care, or rather, I don't do it and do remedial care for objects. So, like, if something breaks, I don't have a PhD in organic chemistry. I am not qualified to be like touching up art that has been sun damaged or the like. My job is to stop stuff from getting to that phase. So my real focus in terms of collection management is preventive care. So it is making sure that all the archival records are in cabinets and we have like silica gel in there to keep the humidity contained, that we don't have light on stuff. I do stuff like I put data loggers in cases and then I check those data loggers. One of the unfortunate things that you have to deal with textiles is a bunch of animals, primarily bugs, really like to eat wool, and most military uniforms and a lot of civilian clothes from the Second World War period are wool. So doing stuff like opening up those cases every couple of weeks, checking to see that the glue traps that I have in there don't have any bugs on them. And if they do, figuring out where those bugs are coming from and stopping that before they can really damage stuff. So my job is to kind of make sure that stuff doesn't happen to the objects rather than doing stuff to them. And then the other big part is I facilitate access. Thing about museum people is we love artifacts, we love objects. We used to joke at my graduate school that if they'd let us, we'd lick the museum objects. In fact,
We all want to fuck the flag.
yeah, I
For
mean,
sure.
to be fair, like some of the geology people actually do get to lick the rocks because you can tell some stuff about the rocks by taste. So we used to bully the natural sciences people about how you're actually the ones who get to lick the artifacts. But we really want to facilitate access to these things. The irony is that we have to keep these so that objects so that they aren't being used all the time just to make sure that they don't degrade. But at the same time, why are we keeping these things? And it's so that people can see them and learn from them. And like there is an ability to spark understanding that comes from objects, and I think really importantly, empathy that we're trying to facilitate. And on the understanding side, that's like scholars or students coming in and looking at original material to do their work. We have graduate students and undergrads come in and access our oral histories because they want to learn about like what the experience of Japanese American incarceration was from people who were there. We want to facilitate, people who want to understand like what their grandfather or great uncle experienced in the war. We want to facilitate their better understanding of it. And so the irony is I have to both like try to keep people from touching the stuff, but I also want them to really interact with and understand the things. So a big part of my job is thinking about, okay, what do we have and how can I get it so that people know that we have it and are able to use it in such a way that it builds up, their knowledge, their understanding of what happened in our past.
So, is the museum that you work at one that can be visited, or is it just kind of collections point, and then you facilitate, having people come and interact with it, or like I would have to say, hey, I want to come check out these letters or something, or is it kind of an open display? I honestly I don't know how the process works. So please, walk me through it.
So we have two public spaces. We have the Post Street Gallery and Building 640. Those have open public hours. You can just walk in off the street. The Post Street Gallery, the Peace Gallery is free. We really want that to be a community space that anyone can walk into, regardless of cost, and kind of engage with the Japanese American community as it exists in Japantown in San Francisco. And then we have a small fee to help keep our operations funded at Building 640 because it is pretty expensive to keep a historic building operational. But
Yes,
yeah,
especially a World War II barracks kind of. Well, you said it was for biplanes, so yeah, that's That's not something that's
It's from around 1906, so um,
as somebody who owned a house from the 1800s, I understand your pain.
yeah, and we also had to refit the inside to make it ADA compliant. So we have the joy of an old building with the joy of also needing to have like guys from TK Elevator come in and do all the code inspections. So the best of both worlds of modern and old. Um, but we do have public hours for that. Um, and that's where like kind of our big like permanent collection is going to be at Building 640, and then we have the archival stuff and a lot of the other stuff is in storage. We'll try to rotate them to displays when we can. Some of it is just too delicate or too in too bad of shape to necessarily be displayable for long periods of time. And then we'll have stuff that we just don't have room for. Ultimately, one of the greatest problems that almost any museum faces is you don't have enough gallery space for the objects that you have. And so our goal with those is to try to get those out and loan them to other institutions who can show them off. We have ongoing loans right now at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the U.S. Army Museum, the Presidio San Francisco Officers Club gallery, and we are talking about other loans that I obviously can't like until the paperwork's done and they're off. I can't necessarily say where they are, but we always are in a conversation with other institutions as varied as we've had materials loaned to San Francisco Airport Terminal 1. The Harvey Milk Terminal has a small museum there that is supposed to reflect San Francisco and its people. We have materials out there to reflect the history of Japanese people in San Francisco. So we try to, if we can't put it on display, we really try to find someone who can. Or we try to host objects that from other places that and get their stuff out when we have space in our gallery.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I like, we have a science center here in St. Louis, and every once in a while they're just like, yeah, we're just gonna pull stuff up from storage and let you look at it because it's a science center, it's all nicely curated, but occasionally they just have like, here's our big empty room, and here, do you want to see what a an iron lung looks like? Here's an iron lung from the 50s. Here's some here's some electronic doodads from the 50s, and they'll have like it's not super well curated, but they have, here's what it is, here's how it was used, and you can come back here and take a look at it, and then we're gonna rotate it back in and bring some other stuff out for you. And it's like not necessarily the best way, but I do like that. I'm learning that museums have more than what's just on display. My local art museum, as I was mentioning earlier, they rotate some stuff, but obviously the main thrust of everything stays. Like the paintings, the artifacts. They will do exhibits for different different things, and they will bring things out or they will borrow things, but it doesn't really change all that much. And it is interesting to know, like, whatever you're seeing on the surface, there's a lot more underneath that you're not seeing, and that's due to time, due to space, due to funding, due to any other reasons why we just can't have everything on display all the time.
Yeah, I think a good rule of thumb that we kind of went with in terms of my educational background, and I got my master's from the University of Toronto, and in terms of museums, generally speaking, you're looking at between 10 and 15% at really, really large museums of their collection being able to be displayed. Sometimes you're looking at like in small galleries, small museums, you might be looking at like less than 10%, maybe even closer to 1% of a permanent collection being able to be displayed in their gallery space. Because a lot of what museums do is function as a preservation thing more than necessarily education. Education is a huge part, and it's like the main thing we do for the public, but preservation is another huge part of what museums do. And so that's one of the big questions that I always have to ask myself whenever I'm talking with people that want to donate stuff to our institution is, if I take this, I am not just accepting this for me, for my tenure working at this museum. working at the Historical Society. I am potentially giving this to some collection manager 80 years in the future, 100 years in the future. We don't know. Obviously, no, human institutions don't last that long, but the sort of duty of care we talk about in the field is like in perpetuity. Like, is this something that you'd want to have in collection potentially forever? Because the process to deaccession, to get rid of something from your collection, is really hard, and it's hard for a reason because when people give us objects or archival records, they are entrusting you that like this is something that mattered a lot to my father or my grandfather, or it's something that like I experienced and I think is historically valuable. Will you take care of it? And if you say yes to that, that's a tremendous responsibility to your donor.
Yeah. I actually have something on display in the military museum here because I happen to know the person that was curating it when it was going through a lot of renovations. And she said, "Look, we have uniforms throughout the years, but we want the most modern Army uniforms. And it's like if you've got any, we'll pay you for it, and we'll put it up on display in there." And I have a full my name, my rank, my patches and everything, and it's really nice, to have like, oh, I'm indelibly marked on the city at this point, but it's nice to know that it is that's a permanent thing. My Even if it's not on display, it will always be in a box somewhere and marked down. This is a military uniform from this time period, donated by whoever, and in perpetuity, somebody's gonna have to look at my dirty ass uniforms. I cleaned it before I handed it in.
We appreciate that. We don't always get it. I got we recently received a donation from a fellow who had the estate of a fellow who had been in the military intelligence service in the Korean War since the Defense Language Institute, the one that's now on the Presidio of Monterey, that didn't really start until kind of after the Korean War, like around the time that the road divisional structure, like that big restructuring in the U.S. Army, that's when they like took it from the Military Intelligence Service Language School and it became the Defense Language Institute. So he was in Korea, and his family just kind of like says, "Hey, we have this guy. He was in Korea. Would you be interested in his like trunks that he brought over to Korea with his uniform and stuff?" And we said, "Sure, please bring it over." And I'm opening it up, and they don't have like a full inventory of it. And I find, Korean War era underwear.
uh, Korean War era skid marks in it.
I mean, I won't comment on that just to preserve some people's dignity and to not traumatize the listener. But that stuff doesn't. That stuff does not. It's not uncommon. He actually had his full shaving kit in there, including a fresh bar of soap. So we were able to put that. Our goal with that is to take that. It's really well folded. He was an incredibly neat guy. Our goal is to take that and just put some plexiglass over it and put it on display hopefully someday and be able to be like, this is what a soldier's like preparing for the Korean War did.
So if if you do get those clothes, can you wash them? Like, can you make any alterations? Like, I'm giving this to you. Obviously, like maybe if it's some paperwork, maybe there's repairs that can be made to the paper, but like here's my, for me it was a modern uniform, so it's like, yeah, I washed it before I gave it to them. I don't think I even wore that uniform because I was so close to getting out, I didn't need them all. But you get that Korean War era underwear, I guess you really can't wash that. You can't send it through a washing machine because it's 80 years old at this point. Who knows if it's going to come out the other end?
Yes, so it really depends on the object. With paper, for example, one of the first things I do is, like, if you give me a photo album, like maybe, a family member was in the occupation force of Japan, was a Nisei linguist, and was in the occupation force, and he has a bunch of photos of post-war Japan, with him and the other guys in the occupation force, and then also civilians and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to take that, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to deconstruct your photo album, and I'm going to get as much adhesive off as I can. I'm going to go in with a razor. I'm going to gently pull out any staples, any materials, because ultimately what you want for long-term storage of materials is you want as few mixed pieces of material as possible, because the way in which you preserve metal is different than the way in which you preserve wood. The way in which you preserve photographic material is different than the way in which you would preserve a staple. And in all honesty, I'm not all that interested in preserving a staple from the Second World War. I'm interested in preserving that photograph, so I'm going to go in there with a staple remover, and I'm very gently. I spend a lot of time sitting at a desk, very gently removing staples, taking tape off with razors, that sort of stuff. So that way we get all the stuff that can decay, that's going to decay more rapidly and potentially increase the decay in the object off of it, and then I can store it with other stuff. Our golden rule in museums is store like with like. I store paper with paper, I store metal with metal, I store wood with wood, because they're all decaying in the same manner, and they're giving off gases that are the same, so you aren't potentially cross-contaminating. This is really comparatively easy for some things. Paper is honestly surprisingly great. There's a reason why we have really old books. Wood and metal can be a little less easy.
Yeah, I can understand, and that does make, I've seen staples rust and discolor paper and everything like that, but it makes sense that you would have to bring it in and take off whatever crusty, like if something was dirty, like here's my grandfather's boots from World War II. And it's covered in covered in French mud that's 80, 90 years old. You're gonna want to gently clean that off and maybe polish it up a little bit and have that, not necessarily just for display, but just because mud and dirt and moisture and things like that are bad for leather when you stick it on there for extended periods of time.
Yeah, and so like with the example of clothing, I might hand wash it, depending on the age. We have a collection of, like one of our more happy collections is we collect material related to community fairs in Japantown. So we have a bunch of T-shirts from Nihonmachi Street Fair, and from Cherry Blossom Festival, and from from other community events, and that sort of stuff where it's like a T-shirt from a festival in the 1980s. We will just kind of throw that in the wash. If it's something like from the Korean War, I will go to our sink in the back and I will hand wash stuff and I will let it dry. So it really depends on the material and how new it is. In regards to newer stuff, we've had on display right now, there's a exhibit that we are really happy to host, of art called The Go for Broke Spirit by a photographer named Shane Sato. He takes photos of Nikkei, which is the term for Japanese diaspora people throughout the world, Nikkei veterans in the United States, starting off with 442 and 100th Infantry guys, all the way up to people who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. And one of the folks who was a combat veteran of Bosnia, he lent us his dress uniform, and he was kind enough to, before that, like, send it to dry cleaning, so we had a nice 1994 dress uniform.
Right, which like is one of those, like, you can't exactly stuff it into a washing machine, but it's not exactly at the point of having to hand wash it in the dump sink in the back.
Yeah, I'm not having to like take off of his medals and then put them back on.
Yeah, and then having to look up like the AR-670-1 of 1994 and figure out exactly where
that is something that I have to do. Is I have to go find the correct one for the year that we're trying to represent.
I am sorry. Let me go ahead and be the first to apologize to you for having to do that, but you'd make one hell of an NCO if ever you joined the military, because you would know exactly where everything is supposed to be.
Yeah, but my problem is I'm also like, I've been too long in California, and we've had examples where we've been working with Japanese institutions, and they've been like, okay, we're ready to sign off on this loan form. Can you go ahead and put your company seal on the document so that we can make it official? And I've had to respond via email, I'm sorry, this is California. You're lucky I'm wearing closed-toed shoes while I'm writing this email.
Yeah, I also am of that. Like, look, I got out of the Army, and if the Army ever wanted me back, the first thing is they're going to have to be okay with me smoking weed like every day. And if they're not, then that's their problem, not my problem. And that's not so much California, but that is a lot of, I spent 20 years in the Army and I don't want to do that shit anymore.
Yeah, I don't necessarily blame you. Having like had the almost the quasi LARPing experience of having to do that stuff, I fully don't understand reenactors because at least they pay me for it.
There are reenactors too that like will take it too far. They will like get the underwear, the period like yeah, like and look, I don't understand anybody that likes to dress up and go play pretend when you're an adult, whether you're a LARPer or a Civil War reenactor. But I'm also not going to take it away from you. You know, if that's what you want to do with your weekend and you ain't hurting anybody, the only people that I'm very questionable about that are the World War II reenactors who dress up like Nazis. We don't. But that's what like I will accept the Confederates because I get to watch them get blown up by cannons. But I'm not going to accept the guys like, oh no, I just dress up as a Nazi for fun, just for history's sake. I don't think that needs to happen. That's always been my problem with the reenactors is like somebody has to play the bad guy, and usually the bad guy was really fucking bad.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand from a collector standpoint because I think for a lot of guys, it's like an excuse to invest in like an M1 carbine. And believe me, I would. If I had the cash, I would do. Talking to reenactors, I think one of the dumbest, funnest things you can do is get training rifle grenades for the M1 rifle and, go out there and huck a bit of metal a few hundred yards out with a blank. It's very fun, and I think it's mostly an excuse to do that, but also the getting the details right is very hard, and I am glad that someone pays me to do it because it does not seem like a hobby that I would enjoy.
And it's very surprising to me that there aren't more people that have like that kind of spicy brain that is just like, you mean somebody will pay me to do this, to be this anal retentive about a uniform? Fucking sign me up. But you got to go through like 7 years of school first. So
Yeah, and unfortunately, and I think this is one of like the institutional failings of museums in our society, you also have to be willing to like not make a living wage for a very long time and be in a position where you can. I got very lucky. My family is from an upper middle class background. I was able to, like not I was never desperately poor. I was able to, put food on the table. There are a lot of people, who in grad school aren't able to do that, and that means that there are a lot of people who don't make it through grad school who really should, especially a lot of people who aren't, white or upper middle class, a lot of people who, for what one reason or another, are from a marginalized background who don't make it through, these library museum schools who aren't able to pursue this stuff just because like at the end of the day you still gotta eat.
hmm and yeah, you can't go eat the MRE from the Korean War. Well, you can if you're that one guy that does that on YouTube, Steve, MRE Steve. You should bring him on.
We
You
do have
get
a
him.
we do have a box of MREs, I think, from the 442nd. I'm still trying to track down its provenance, but I know it's sea rations, and I keep looking at it suspiciously, like I gotta throw that out somehow.
I But I mean, if it's all still sealed, it's technically I wouldn't eat it. I wouldn't give myself Korean War botulism, but and I don't think anybody's asking. Do you put a can out like, look, here's what they had to eat out of? They had these
Yeah,
little cans with the keys. But yeah, that's
yeah.
that is absolutely questionable. Don't eat that.
The P38 can opener.
I actually bought my dad a P38 can opener. You can get them off of fucking Amazon of all places because he was in the army way back in the day and had those. And he's like, oh yeah, you always had one hanging around on your dog tag. So I bought him a P38 to hang on his dog tags, which is a hard thing to search for because the P38 was also a airplane. The army and its naming conventions, like how many things do you think are named M1? Like
Well,
I can
I'm sure I could with an M1 shoot someone, form the basis of an armored unit, probably lay a bridge, have some boots, potentially some boot polish, given the army, and definitely at least a couple of pieces of uniform.
Yeah, you could have almost an entire military based on things that are just M1s in the army.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like a gun motor carriage out there too, just like a truck. Who
Yeah,
knows?
it's unfortunate the 50 cal is the M2, just missing it by one.
Yeah,
So, Lillian, tell me about your average day. So I know you're working from home, so you're podcasting with me. But do you come in and there's like you've got the projects that you're working on, or is there like a schedule? Like, hey, next week we have X, Y, and Z happening, so you're going to be doing these kinds of things. Like, what do you do when you get into the office?
So I have a big pile of stuff that I'm currently trying to sort through. So there are basically two ways that things get into my inbox to deal with. One is being donated, and the other is what we like to call found in collection. And found in collection is something that every institution experiences. Your local library has a set of books, I guarantee you, that are found in collection, and it's stuff that is in your building and you have no idea how it got there.
I am at like it doesn't. I wouldn't think that, but as soon as you say like, oh yeah, absolutely, because how many times have I just you create something or you leave something there and then it's there for a while and the people who put it there have left and now nobody knows why it's there anymore.
Yeah, and you take that at museums and like the older institutions, it's been there since the 1800s. For us, it's only been there since the 80s, but still. Um, the things that I attempt to do with that is the first thing I do with everything is before I even inventory it, I go ahead and make sure it's not dangerous. I've been very lucky. I haven't had too many close calls. The worst thing I ever had was volunteering early on in my experience as a high school volunteer. We got a donation at a military history museum I was at that was actually right next to our National Guard, Air National Guard airfield, and someone from the base was like getting rid of stuff, and they donated a M72, I think it was A1 law, and so like they were pretty diligent about like not making sure that the rocket and motor were out of there, or the warhead and motor were out of there. But there were tritium night sites in that, and I did have to call up like the base radiological safety officer and be like, "Hey, I don't see paperwork on this. Did you take out the radioactive stuff?"
That is correct. I guess we don't really use that anymore, but just to give an active well, I guess this isn't the museum you were working at currently, so
No, it
like,
was.
why would they give a law to a Japanese? But no, that makes sense.
It was
It's
a
a different
military
one.
history museum literally on
Yeah.
base. So,
Okay.
yeah, so
Well, then that all makes sense. Then I love the military history museums on base because they always have the coolest shit.
yeah, it's always
That
like weird stuff from whatever like unit you're with. And it was like, yeah, something that some guy had, you know, it was from their collection of stuff that was like left over from the Vietnam War, and they're like, we should really get rid of all this. And they've like, we've got this empty law tube.
yeah, and you can't toss it in the dumpster. Like the museum just kind of becomes a dumping ground of like, well, technically we can't throw this away, but the paperwork to deal with it also sucks. Let's see if the museum will give us $50 for it.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we so that's about the closest call I've gotten. But there are horror stories of someone gets grandpappy's after he passes away, gets all of his war stuff and just puts it in a box and drops it off to the local museum, and you're digging through it and you find a live grenade.
Yeah. I imagine that happens more often than not. It has always been very surprising to me when people tell those stories because like try to get a grenade out of a war zone today and it's not, at least as an American soldier, it's not going to happen without some like really hard smuggling. It wasn't like World War II where he's just like, yeah, I'm just taking all this shit home with me. I've got my grenades, I've got a German Luger, I've got a bunch of loot that I've pilfered, and then customs is like, yeah, it's fine, I guess. Like, just don't pull the pin on the grenade while you're flying, bro. You'll be fine.
Yeah, just so long as you like don't blow up the ship you're on the way back from Italy, everything's cool.
Yeah, nobody cares. And yeah, I imagine that catching something like that is everybody has to get out and you have to call whatever the civilian version of EOD is to come and deal with it because not only is it an explosive, but it's an 80-year-old explosive.
Yeah, no, that's the one where I pull out my manual and I have San Francisco Police Bomb Squad's direct number because I give that to museums and I call them. Fortunately, I haven't had to do that, but that was definitely when you're in grad school, you get the story of the, oh yeah, we had to call the RCMP and they came out and they blew up this amount of ammo that someone had just left in a box in front of our museum, and you're like, Oh my god, it's Canada. A lot of that ammo is not actually legal for civilians to possess.
No, somebody wanted like using the museum as your amnesty box. Like I need to get rid of all this, but I can't throw it away and I can't go give it to somebody without any questions. I'm going to leave it like a found child in front of an orphanage here. Like just
Yeah.
here's a box of ammo.
Yeah, here's a box of, rimfire ammo and a grenade, and you're like, I don't really like those things being next to each other.
Right. We need to have some sort of like amnesty program that says, look, if you have a grenade, we're not going to ask questions. We'll get rid of it for you. You don't have to worry about it. Please stop having your grandfather's old grenade.
Yeah, yeah. So, there's the first thing I do is like obviously I check, a materials safety data sheet. I make sure that there's nothing radioactive about it, or that could explode. There's all sorts of really fun, dangerous stuff that we made things out of in the past. World War One helmets have asbestos in them, so
Ooh,
yeah, there's all sorts of
spicy.
fun little stuff like that. So you make sure that it's safe to handle, and you do whatever safety things you need to do, and then it goes in a box where it's like, I will get to this eventually, and you try to process in as much as you can. A lot of that stuff, unfortunately, kind of gets left to interns, where you're like, hey, you're a college student or graduate student, figure out what the heck is in all this box. Here's a deed of gift, go nuts.
Yeah.
Because
See, that's what I'd want to do. I just want to rifle through shit and like take a look at what's in. Like every box is a treasure to me.
yeah, no, it's fascinating. Often it's very, very cool. You'll find like really wild stuff. But then the bulk of what I do, because I'm the collections manager, and I function both as the collections manager and because we're such a small institution as a registrar. And what the registrar does is they oversee the entire inventory. So the collection manager cares for the inventory, the registrar is in charge of it. I wear both hats. I'll see like, okay, what are the exhibits that are coming up? Do I need to pull anything for that? Do I need to meet with a curator and tell them what's available? If an institution's like putting on an exhibit and is working with us, they might say, hey, we're interested in these sorts of things. What do you have that is like that? So I might get like, hey, we're doing an exhibit on, just for example, the 442nd and 100th and Military Intelligence Service, and families in camp. What do you have related to that? And I'll go through our things and I'll see like, okay, let's see who the donors were. Did they have a relative that served? Let's look at our military collection. Did they have a relative in camp? And then I'll see what we have of those collections, and I'll make a big spreadsheet, and I'll like say, this is the object, this is its accession number, which is the thing that we use to track it. Um, this is when it was donated. This is by who. This is like our legal status of it. Do we own it outright? Are there conditions upon displaying it? What's this? If it's an image, what's the history of its copyright? Can we actually use it? Then like a condition descriptor, like is at the most basic level, is it excellent? Is it good? Is it fair? Is it mediocre, or is it gonna need like, or is it in a position where we're like, this has to have a conservator intervene before we can display it? And then I'll send that off with like reference images to the person with the PhD who's putting it all together. So I kind of serve as like the backup person to someone who is, focused on education. My job is like, they come to me and they say, I want to do an exhibit about X. What do you have that can support that? And I'll produce a list for them and say, these are all the objects that are related to X.
And then do they have to facilitate the moving, or is that also done by you?
So they'll come back and say, hey, can we look at these sorts of things? And if they're local, we'll go to the storage units and we'll go look at them together. If not, I'll give them reference photos. And they'll say, yes, let's use that. And so then I'll take that out. I'll do a little like inventory sheet that says like, hey, this object was taken by me on this date for this reason. It goes where the object normally lives. And then another copy of that is in our database. So that way, like when someone's looking for the object on the database, they'll be like, hey, this normally lives in like cabinet 2, shelf 3, box 4, but it's not there right now. It's here. And then I'll take that, I'll get reference photos of it as it looks coming out of storage. I'll prepare it. If it has to just go to an exhibit that we're putting on, I might just like walk down holding it,
Just carry it on down there
yeah,
yourself.
I'll stick it in the back of my Honda Fit and I'll drive it there. Um, in a box, maybe with some plastic wrap on it, some acid-free paper, that sort of stuff. If it's something that's going to be shipped, I'll get some foam and I'll custom cut a box for it to be shipped in. And then, secret of secrets in the museum industry, we contact UPS or FedEx and we say, hey, we're sticking a gentle label on this and a shock watch sticker. Take this to wherever.
Oh, so you can have it shipped and be like specifically, no, please don't fuck this up.
Yeah,
We are checking to make sure you don't.
it depends on the objects. There are some things where like you actually do go with it. There are collection managers who, for some objects, like physically go with the thing. Like if you are, shipping a Monet or another really valuable art piece, you will have like in the armored car with the guy with the gun watching the fancy art, a stressed out collections manager being like, also don't go over bumps fast. Um, but we don't really have a lot of that stuff, though. If we were to get something in, I'd also be in charge of kind of like the operational security element of that, and not like in that I'm gonna go get like an AR-15 and stand outside the museum, but I'd be in charge of like making sure that we have licensed security professionals, making sure that we have a safety plan. Like, what's the plan if there's a fire? Do the firefighters know? Hey, no object is worth your life, but if you can, grab this one
Right.
thing.
Yeah, I feel like we should keep the firefighters, but save the Monet if you can.
Yeah,
Buddy.
yeah. It's like if after you've gotten all the humans out, if you have time.
Mm-hmm. And it's not much of a bother. You could grab this.
Yeah.
For us.
Yeah, so that also extends to like our facilities. I make sure we're always in compliance with the code, make sure that our fire suppression system works. I make sure that we have a basic physical plant security. I make sure that all of our doors work, because if you do have to, get objects out because it's flooding, you want to make sure all the doors work.
Yep, absolutely. Just like, and I imagine the exit plan in a museum is much better than the exit plan in like your average nightclub, just because like you guys care more about here's all these things that we need to protect, and the nightclub's like, you're drunk, you can leave wherever.
We try to be. Unfortunately, we also like live with the reality of often being in historic buildings. I worked briefly before I got my master's. I worked for 3 years at a historic prison as a uh, docent and tour guide. And one of our jobs in that role was like every time there's someone in the historic prison, we have to have one person near this door, because it is the one door out of the historic prison and it is 250 pounds, and we aren't going to ask your grandma to open that in a hurry.
Fair enough. And you know what? If ever you need a door guy, I can be that. I haven't gone to college to be a door guy, but I'm pretty sure I can pick it up.
Yeah. But yeah, like there's that aspect of like my job is to protect the safety of artifacts, but because we're a small institution, I also use this as an opportunity to make sure I'm protecting the people who are coming to visit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, I am going to have to wrap this up. We did not get to talking about any of the politics about this, so you're gonna come. You're good to come back, right?
Yeah, I'm more than
Okay.
happy to. Yeah, there's a whole lot of like the history of museums and why they are the way they are that is definitely worth exploring. But thank you so much for having me on. And if anyone wishes to see the collection of the National Japanese American Historical Society, you can go to the Gleason, Gleeson Library of the University of San Francisco. We are co-housed with their Special Collections Library, so if you search for Japanese American Confinement Sites, USF Gleason, you're going to find our finding aid and digitized records of a lot of our materials and reference photos, so you can see the sorts of materials we have and get a kind of a glimpse into what a museum holds behind the scenes.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm going to put the website into the show notes, so definitely go check that out. I was looking up the building, and there are like, kind of a Google walkthrough thing where it's got pictures and everything, so you can see all the exhibits that are on display. But yeah, I would always love to see the kind of behind the scenes. I would love to see that in any museum. I'm the logistics nerd, so
Well, you'd get on very well with museum people because we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, I have to move this box 5 feet. How am I going to do that with the minimal amount of movement to the box?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, we'll put it, and I'll bring in a trolley. We can put it on the trolley. We can make sure it's a nice, flat, smooth surface for that 5 feet. We can move it over. I'm there. I'm with you. I can do. I can do these parts. I can hold the door. I promise.
You sound like you have an excellent preparator, which is the job of like physically manufacturing exhibits and then moving stuff into them in you. Because we had to replace the fronting of a case because it got cracked, and we had to spend a couple of months being like, okay, we have to rent a truck that's this long. We will custom fabricate, while they're fabricating our new case front, we will custom fabricate a set of dollies that fits it exactly. And then when we get there, we screw it into place and we move it onto the truck like this. And these are the turns that we make to get it there. And then the four of us all lift it up and slide it in, sort of stuff.
This is the perfect job for a dad. Like, you guys are all just spiritually dads.
Yeah, no, I suppose, yeah, to the artifacts, we try to be the dad.
Yeah, somebody's got to take care of the precious little boy, and get it from point A to point B with as few bumps as possible. Otherwise, he's gonna have a meltdown, and we're gonna deal with it for a while.
Yeah, and sometimes that precious little boy is a shaving kit from the Second World War. Well, thank you so much,
Lilith,
Francis. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.